about disruption today, and the theme that I wanted to talk about is how do you remain relevant in times that are changing so rapidly. Like, I'm sure all of you have seen how the last decade has just gone by. Uh, like, if you just try and walk down the memory lane, 10 years ago, fax was still a thing. A lot of people were appearing for courses to learn typewriting. PCs had not really infiltrated all our homes. Internet was a huge luxury with the MTNL tunes, ding ding ding, and um, in the last 10 years, though, so much has changed. And specifically, if you look at the last 3 years of our journey as a nation, as a species, as individuals, and that particular moment became a sort of, for lack of better words, the biggest. Uh, I find it very difficult to define that word because it, it is the moment where India happened. The moment when internet started entering the houses of every single individual. People who had not seen televisions throughout their life, people who had not probably interacted with anyone beyond their village, now had access and unending access and open access to everything and all the information and all the data and everyone in the world. And at that particular junction in our human history, startups in India started flourishing. One of those startups which really flourished, or I would say is still trying to go through the um, gears of work every day, is our startup ShareChat. So we are a small social network. We have around 50 million users in India. We are available in 15 languages. We are completely Indian. We do not have English as a language. Uh, if some of you belong to the startup world, you might have heard about us somewhere or the other. But one thing that which was very key during our journey was how we disrupted an ecosystem which was completely English oriented and English internet driven. And at that point in 2014, a lot of people used to ask this question, whether we'll ever have an Indian Facebook, an Indian Google, or an Indian Amazon. Will there ever be anyone who would be curious enough to disrupt Facebook? Will there be anyone who can think out of this box? And for most of our human history, the people who could do this were sitting inside Google, inside Facebook, inside Amazon. They were engineers who were our family members, our relatives, our friends, who left India, went to the US, started working for all of these companies, and kept disrupting the ecosystem. But the credit never went back to us. So one thing that, now for the lack of time, I think we are already running short on it. I'll just share a tidbit from our own story as to how we figured out that Facebook is not changing according to time. The social media is not changing according to the time that we are experiencing here in India. And what can we do to disrupt it? And that's the exact moment where we figured out that at that point in 2014 December, there were around 225 million internet users in India. Today, if you look at the numbers, a lot of numbers claim that we are already crossing 500 million internet users. But the big thing is that out of this 500 million internet users, which means 275 million new internet users, around 200 million of them do not really speak English. The 75 million others claim they know English, but the fact of the matter is, as you all would know, a vast majority of Indians do not know English beyond 25 words. Our vocabulary is extremely limited, but somehow the Indian audience, whether you take it from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or rural areas, or any of the metro cities, somehow we have found the English script to be our home, and English script to be more easy to adapt to. And that is what has allowed innovations like WhatsApp to take off. But in the middle of this, we found this very particular thing about India, that while we do not really know English beyond 25 words, our adherence to this script, our understanding and our love for the anglicized version of English sorry, the anglicized version of vernacular languages, whether you call it Hinglish, Telugish, Tamilish, Manglish, or whatever, is going to be the future. And hence, we started this platform called ShareChat. Now, um, before I bore you further with stories around this, one thing that has been constant in our journey, which has allowed us to grow through these last 5 years, has been around constantly figuring out how to disrupt your own self. Like a lot of people ask us, how do you maintain your leadership position? How do you remain the top platform when there is an onslaught from new Chinese companies like TikTok and the ByteDance family, and then Facebook launching its own products, and YouTube going deeper with more longer tail content? The answer is simple, and as pointed out by Ravi very well, that you need to keep disrupting your own self. And when you're disrupting your own self, one thing that I think a lot has been said today about how to disrupt yourself better. But one thing I would like the audience to understand and appreciate, that without having any specific insight, something that you know about the problem statement which nobody else knows, you will not be able to cause disruption. And unless and until you are disrupting your problem statement again and again, over and over, somebody else would gather some specific insight by just observing you and then disrupt you. So the only way to remain relevant in the times to come and become a bigger startup and run the marathon, as Vani pointed out in her talk, is to keep disrupting yourself. Keep finding out that specific insight that, if I don't reach to my, like as Vani pointed out, if she doesn't reach to her kids while on the track and reaches via the bus, she wouldn't be happy. That's the specific insight. That's what allowed her to disrupt her own self from stopping her own self in leaving the track. And this is exactly what happens at every junction in your startup journey. You'll have to disrupt yourself a million times over. And if you stop at some point, you will end up having the fate of the millions and billions of startups that have shut down in the last century, because they became, for lack of better words, they became lazy and stopped disrupting themselves. So keep disrupting yourself, and I think that's the only mantra I can give to everyone to remain relevant in the times ahead. Thank you.